I want to just begin by saying thanks to everybody for coming. This is sort of odd. I can't see anybody, but you can see me, so I'm sort of presenting into a vacuum here. But so I'm John. I'm from Northfield, Mount Hermon. I'm going to give you my email 2 or 3 times here during this session, just so if you have any questions that we don't get to, or even if you just would like to keep the conversation going, I'm always up for that. So today, we're going to talk about what I think is, well, for me, what has been solid writing pedagogy, but particularly as it pertains to the remote setting. So really from March right through where we are today. So we're going to talk about relationships with students, and I think what you're going to see is a strong correlation between social SEL, social emotional learning objectives that you probably have for your courses, and just the way we use those in terms of teach and writing. I'm going to talk about trying to chip away at what I think a lot of students think of as sort of a transactionary relationship they have between their written work, where if I write the paper the way you want me to write it, I will get this certain grade. I'm always trying to chip away at that and make sure the students know they're writing for themselves. I want them to be 100% aware of the audience. But at the end of the day, my comments on your papers are only suggestions. There will be a grade, and I want you to be aware of the audience. But again, I never want the paper to be mine. So I want to try to chip away at that sort of transactionary mindset through this conversation today. I'm going to talk about self-reflection in the writing process. I'm going to share some prompts I've found that have really helped me here in the last 8 months since I've gone to remote or hybrid. And they're prompts that I think you could probably use immediately. Going to talk about feedback and using tech to deliver it in a way that I think allows students to really feel supported emotionally during this time. I'm gonna, and this is what Jay touched on a little bit earlier, I've got breaks in this presentation for Q&A or discussion, but I definitely wanna make sure you feel like you can just send Jay a question and I'll stop and we can just answer the question there or have a little discussion as well. So yeah, so just any question you have, you can put in the chat for Jay. And I'm going to give some written examples through this slideshow. I've shared these with my colleagues here. We use them with our students. All of those examples are on a Google document that I've set up that you can access. So Jay, if you could, would you put that bit.ly link in the chat for people?
Yep.
And you know, for me, anytime I attend a conference, I sort of call it a win if I get something that I can use immediately. So that's definitely my mindset here as I'm designing this. So my goal is for you to be able to use something that we talk about today. So I want to begin with an excerpt. Cynthia Ozick is one of my favorite essayists, and this is one I teach with my AP Composition Language course. This is towards the end of her essay titled The Drugstore in Winter. And I've come back to this passage often here since March. Toward the end of the essay, she's got this wonderful paragraph. A writer is buffeted into being by school hurts, Orwell, Forster, Mann. But after a while, other ambushes begin. Sorrows, deaths, disappointments, subtle diseases, delays, guilts, the spite of the private haters of the poetry side of life, the snubs of the glamorous, the bitterness of those for whom resentment is a daily gruel, and so on and so on. And then one day you find yourself leaning here writing. So the New York Times in 1982 asked Ozick and a bunch of other writers, but they asked Ozick to write an essay for their Writers on Writing column. And most people wrote sort of how-to pieces. Cynthia Ozick produced this. And I think any educator would say we certainly don't want our students to feel like this after a typical high school class. Certainly for me, not after a typical high school English class. And certainly as parents, we don't want our kids to experience their education the way that Cynthia Ozick says she did here. So I think we're at a time right now where a lot of kids are hurting. A lot of kids can feel what Cynthia Ozick's talking about. Harvard School of Public Health put out this sort of shocked me. 14% of parents say they've seen a decline emotionally in their children since March. And then the CDC says 40% of our kids themselves report feeling anxious or even depressed. So with that in mind, we're looking at what students are asked to do really since March, and I would imagine through June here. I don't see major changes happening. They've got to navigate this new world, whether it's a Chromebook, whether you can afford the best computer. There's still, anytime we're giving kids tech, there's always a level of stress. Kids feel isolated. There's not a lot of way around that. I think one of the really fascinating things that I've seen is the struggle kids are having emotionally. Their home is now public space for anybody. You can turn off the screen, but for some kids, there is sirens going off in the background. There are sirens that we can hear. Your home now is public. Kids fear, obviously, for their health. I think for the well-being of their families. Financially, families are under duress. Kids are feeling that. Our nation is reckoning with its racial past. Obviously, that's on the surface for most of us. And we're coming through a really volatile election period. So there's a ton weighing on our kids to start with. And I think, too, us as educators, I think fodder for discussion, this is worth a whole department meeting on for you English chairs out there. But, a lot of this presentation today, a lot of the things I'm thinking about here the past 8 or 9 months, how has your writing pedagogy changed since March? I think it's something we want to consider. I think the losses have been significant for a lot of us, giving up a lot of the face-to-face time, the 6 feet, the masks in the classroom, all of these things, the more heavily reliance on tech. I think, too, it's interesting to think, have we gained anything? Do you feel like there have been things that you've gained, things that you've added maybe to your tool belt over the last 9 months that you feel you're gonna stay with as we go forward? And one of the major questions I think it's really important to come back with too is, what do our students need emotionally from us as educators in order to grow as writers? So in this period when many of them are feeling totally isolated, the reliance on computers to meet with us, What do those students need emotionally from us to grow as writers? And I touched on this earlier. I think as we're talking about writing instruction and social emotional learning objectives you have in your course, I took 4 that I think most people are pretty cognizant of: responsibility, social awareness, managing themselves, and relationships they have. And I think they align very well for most of us with the way we approach the teaching of writing. We want kids to write with an authentic voice. We want them to write to learn. We want them to learn to write to be able to feel like they own the paper. And you need to really honor those social emotional learning objectives. I think for those writing goals to work. So I want to talk about some aspirations we have usually as writing teachers. And there's a great Joan Didion quote I offer here. For me, it just speaks to the safety that a student needs to have in the classroom when they're writing. For our aspirations to happen, again, to write authentically, a mantra in my class, and you'll see this a couple slides down the road here: I will always reward you for taking a risk. The kids know that. You will always be rewarded if you're taking a stylistic risk. Let me know what you're trying to accomplish, right? I have kids writing me notes. I tried to use an M dash in this paper. In the conclusion, would you look at that and give me feedback? Right, but I don't want a cookie cutter. I teach only seniors right now. I don't want a cookie cutter 5-paragraph essay. I want you to take stylistic risks throughout your writing. So you've got to feel safe in order to do that. We obviously, I think we all want our students to write sound mechanically. We want them to communicate effectively. And then again, ownership is really important to me. So I'm always trying to establish a rapport with the student. That has been difficult, obviously, over the last nine months. We simply do not see students, probably not as often, but certainly not in the same venue all the time as we did before the pandemic. So the goal of establishing a rapport with each student is challenging. I need them to feel like we're working together on your writing. I think a writing instructor is always the coach, the team psychologist, and the cheerleader, sort of all in one. It's a much different method of instruction than a discipline where you're only delivering content. This is a much more personal, personalized type of teaching that we do. So the first thing I want to really sort of hit today is going to revolve around that rapport and establishing a dialogue with the student in a virtual setting. So this is part of my syllabi for each of my courses. And I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to offer some examples, but as I'm going here, again, I want to just offer you the opportunity to just yell the J here, and I'm happy to stop. Jay, does that work?
Sorry, sorry, John. I was just on mute. Yeah, that works great.
Okay. So for each written assignment, unless told otherwise, or if you're teaching an AP course and there's a timed essay or an exam, but for everything else, you'll be asked to attach a paragraph above your essay. So I asked the kids, put this above the title. I want to read your note before I start reading the paper. So in which you will explain your feelings upon completing the assignment. This is brief, doesn't have to be more than a half page. It's a self-assessment in which you discuss these 7 things. 1, what you attempted to accomplish in the work, what you learned from writing it, the challenges you discovered while you were writing, areas of your work where you see improvement. That means a ton to me. So you and I are tracking your writing throughout the semester, throughout the school year, throughout the term. But during our time together, you and I are writing back and forth here, and we're both tracking your growth. Number 5, what are the parts of the paper that you still think need work? Number 6, specific questions you have for me about the piece that you want feedback on. So perhaps what you think are still problem areas within the work. And then what you might do differently in a revision. I want to talk about 6 for a second, and I'll come back to this a couple slides from now. But 6 generates buy-in. So I tell the students, obviously, I'm grading the paper. I'm a huge proponent of rubrics. I have a rubric for just about everything. I'm obviously going to use the rubric as I'm assessing your piece of writing, but 6 gives you a say. So if Jay writes in his note to me, I wrote 3 different versions of the conclusion. Can you give me specific feedback on that? And another student writes, last paper you told me that my intro was a little dull. I really tried to punch it up this time. I'm going to read those papers a little bit differently, or at least focus on different aspects of those papers for the student. So if I'm the student, many times there's going to be instant buy-in because they're looking at this a little bit as a way in which they can have a say in the parts of the papers that I really linger on. And before we go any further, I always want to give Tom Jen credit. He's a Harvard professor. I attended a workshop. He touched on this. He uses this. I've obviously tweaked it to fit my needs over the years. But Tom, Jen, and the people at Harvard use this method. The nuts and bolts, the logistics of this, the students know up front, this has no part at all in how I assess your paper. If I think you're doing this in sort of a half-hearted manner, I will have a talk with you about it. But that conversation is always, allow me to help you, right? If you take this seriously, I can give you better feedback. And I share with the students the exact same examples I'm about to share with you. This is the person. Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Could I ask one question about how it sounds as though you have a portfolio for each student so that you could keep their papers and your comments together.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you do that virtually? How do you create a portfolio for the kids so that you can go back through their work with them?
I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I've done it. We use Google, and I've done it where every student has a folder inside my class folder. And in that folder is where they will turn in papers. So I can go through that and look at my comments there. We use Canvas. So all the assignments are saved and I can go through my comments there. But a lot of times, I think what you'll find is if you do this with a student, it does become, especially that question 6, where they're commenting on my comments from the previous paper. You know, last week you said this, I really worked on that this week, and we'll go from there. But I do think the Google folders work and a lot of the platforms right now. Like I said, Canvas, they're just literally uploading it into a designated spot for that one group of papers. But that's a great question. I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Sure. So again, this is a personal note from student to me. Any format you want to write in, some kids do formal paragraphs, some kids number it out and list it. I'm not going to grade this. The sentences can either be bulleted or they can be complete. And then here's an example. This is 2 weeks ago, a student's final essay. So this is from my crime literature. This is a senior, and we read Always Outgunned, Always Outnumbered by Walter Mosley. So the student wrote, in my essay, I attempted to wrestle and write about the hard truths of the diverse neighborhoods such as Watts and South Central Los Angeles in 1988 that are unfortunately still relevant today. I also decided to take a risk of scattering a few questions throughout the essay to challenge readers to think while they read my essay. From writing the essay, I became more aware of the significant issues such as racial discrimination and racial profiling, and learned what literary present tense is. One challenge I discovered was not knowing where to start because there are so many ideas to grasp within the reading. Comparing this essay to my other essays, I see improvement in my analysis because I was very engaged in this essay because of the significant issues the characters had to deal with. I believe that I could maybe improve on exploring the theme by including personal experiences based upon preconceptions people have of me as a person of color. But it's difficult for me to fully understand and appreciate the challenges faced by Socrates, given our very different realities. I've never truly walked in his shoes. So for me, the highlights are this, and this goes back to the point you brought up, Jay. I had said to her in a previous paper, what about asking us rhetorical questions? How could those impact your writing? So where she says this, that's something, obviously, for me, I'm seeing growth. We're talking about that. She's spotting places in her writing where that's going to work. It rings true to me. This is not a 5-minute deal she did in the hallway before coming into the room. She's thinking about this. So, in terms of our hopes for our students when they're thinking about their work, thinking about their own growth, this resonates with me. Also, this does as well. A student of color really connecting with the text and looking at areas or maybe finding spots in her paper where she could drop her own personal experience. Maybe as we look at the revision, is there a spot where you could open up with that? So this is an example. I'm going to give another one. It's a different type of essay. This is from AP Composition Language, so it's a rhetoric class. Student says, I enjoyed writing this essay. I have to admit, I significantly went over the 40-minute time limit, but I enjoyed doing so. I think, immediately you see the rapport, hopefully, between me and the student. They're honest about this. They're honest about what happened here. It was good practice for me to walk through the Daily Show transcript and to find many literary strategies the Stewart uses. I did go over the word limit slightly, but since this was supposed to be only like a first draft, I limited my editing and cutting to only one set, thus not allowing me to fully be within the word limit. I tried to start with a more intriguing introduction than one I wrote for my summer essay, and actually had fun giving that a shot. I definitely found that it was easier for me to analyze this show or one of the other speeches than it is to analyze a book. That's interesting to me. I felt like I could have written 3 times this amount analyzing this one show. I am starting to better understand the concept of analysis, and I think the biggest obstacle I'm encountering is myself. So I think I have to suspend my feeling that we're digging for something that isn't there and just right. All in all, I enjoyed writing this paper and feel that analyzing things that are not only text is and would be helpful practice. So for me, this is interesting. Right? I think for the English teacher, the students who see a metaphor or a symbol all the time in every single thing, and we're always telling them, you know, some things are just things. This is that student. So hopefully they're coming to that realization. In the back and forth discussion I might have with the student, I think this is important. They're seeing growth. They're reflecting on our work together here with their writing. And this is another one. Student writes, in this piece, I attempted to use an anecdote as an introduction to an essay supporting genetic research. I tried to make the comparison simple and understandable, one shampoo bottle for an entire family, to carry that over into a more serious matter, disease. I focused a lot on the medical influence genetic research would have. I learned how to incorporate quotes into a persuasive piece and learn to be more direct with my statements. It's difficult to be limited to one article for the supporting evidence that I needed to make the piece really substantial and to prove points effectively. I think I used the analogy well and simplified the problem without underemphasizing the importance of it. I thought my voice was pretty strong as well. Some of the body paragraphs could use work or be expanded to improve the credibility and ease of the paper. I'd love to have feedback on the transitions and the analogy. In a revision, I would expand the body paragraphs in detail and organize them more. So the green for me here, the student wants me to look at transitions and the analogy. So again, I'm going to spend a little more time there. I'm still going to use the rubric that I've made for this particular writing assessment, but I am going to give students specific feedback on those 2 items. I think one of the questions that comes up, does this slow you down if you're sitting there staring at 50 of these papers? I don't really feel like it. I feel like once you get in the flow, once you get to know the student, you know their writing after a couple of days. For me, it does take a little bit longer, but it's not egregious. It's worth doing. That's usually one of the questions. So again, this is the actual passage from my syllabi, what you attempted to accomplish, what you learned, challenges, where you're seeing improvement in your own writing, what parts you think still need work, the specific questions you have for me, and then what you might do differently in the revision. So in terms of buy-in, these are some recent comments, and I think hopefully they speak to the buy-in that this typically generates. So this first one, I asked students to peer review with 2 different people before turning in a draft. I've had some mixed feedback regarding sentence lengths and the flow of my paper. And I'm curious to see if they've been adjusted correctly. I assume they're talking about the sentences, not the 2 peer reviewers. But so you see, this is, for me, it speaks to buy-in. The kids are taking it seriously. Some questions I would ask would be, is my analysis detailed enough? Am I summarizing? Should my second paragraph come before the first? I think that's interesting because the kid is really analyzing their own paper there to make that question. Would it work if I literally flip the intro and the first body paragraph? I love that they're really looking at the writing that way. I'd like feedback on how to make my essay more precise and not wordy. This is an honest comment I got. That's a tall order. I'm going to have to really go through it. And, just like any other paper, you might just focus on one paragraph and do it for them. But some places I would need feedback on how I tie redemption into the separate stories along with the analysis. So it's obviously the writing to that specific prompt. I want to make sure that the majority of the paragraphs are analysis and not a summary of the chapter. That's a great one. And then I want feedback on how effective my conclusion is and whether there was redundancy in my paper or not. So you can see, I think, from these, or one of the things that resonates with me is some of these are very finite analyses of their own writing, and some of them are broader. But kids are looking at their papers through both lenses there.
John, could I ask a question about the way you give feedback to the kids now at a distance? Do you write back to them or do you comment to them verbally?
Are
you going to come?
Yeah, hopefully we get to that. I've got a whole section here on on audio. So
great, thank you.
Yeah, particularly useful in the remote classroom, this cover letter, because of all the things we've sort of talked about. This third bullet, the shift from student and grader to author and editor here. The students know I'm taking their writing very seriously. It just sort of takes care of, I think, a lot of the hopes we have for the relationship aspect of this. The students love having the opportunity to write these notes before I read their paper. But again, I use that language with them, not student and grader. I want this to be, you're the author, I'm the editor. It's still your work. So we're trying to transcend that transactionary relationship. If I write the paper you want me to write, will you give me the grade I want you to give me? So it's no longer just an academic task. It really leads to an authentic discourse and writing. The focus becomes a personal growth. And the revision now is a striving toward mastery. So the next draft of this paper is you writing not just the feedback I gave you, but also to your own cover letter. You're addressing the spots that you saw weaknesses. So the revision is a real step, I think, toward authentic pursuit of mastery here. And again, we're tracking this together. It's not just me with the grade. This is interesting, I think, because this is an example from a recent cover letter for a revision. I removed the parts distinguishing forgiveness from redemption. I asked that question in the margin. What's the difference? It felt to me like the student was confusing forgiveness and redemption. I added new paragraphs, which they put in red with definitions. I also incorporated new evidence from, and they bring in another book to support their analysis of the third book we were reading. I fixed grammatical errors, I cut down sentences. And then, are there any other comments or questions you have on that? Because I can jump to the audio version. The audio.
So John, one of the questions that came up on the chat, it says, does NMH have a common writing rubric to assess student work, or do you have autonomy to determine your own means of assessment?
Yeah, it's the latter. We spend a lot of time, I think, as an English department, and sometimes in conjunction with our history colleagues. But this is a big place. There are 20 English teachers. So no, we can come up with our own rubrics, but we do spend time looking at common rubrics, though, too. You're sharing them would be a better way to say that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John.
Yeah. So I want to talk about an assignment I've had a lot of success with, and I'm going to cut to the chase a little bit here to try to get to the voice comments. I'm looking for, particularly in the remote learning setting, an assignment that stresses analysis, but also honors the integrity of the assessment. I've been using narratives a lot of late. I've been using them for several years, but I think right now, where we're trying to make sure that we can safeguard any type of analytical writing students are doing, this has been really helpful. So I'm asking students to write a scene, a narrative, not a full-blown story, but about 3 pages. It's text-based fiction. So I'm asking you to use characters from a text in a way that illustrates a grasp, the storyline that we read, characters, themes, conflicts, setting. Let me give you a couple examples. This is one we're doing right now. My seniors were asked to read, seniors here at school were asked to read On the Come Up and the things they carried over the summer. So my assessment gives them 2 options. This is a narrative. The first one, where is Lawless's chain? So using Bree from On the Come Up and Elroy Birdall from the things they carried, write a 750 word max narrative that is set at Birdall's camp, which they discover in the things they carried, and begins with the following line. So your scene has to begin with, I looked across the, could be river, could be dining room table, could be cup of coffee, whatever, establish a location at somebody from these books and said, isn't that Lawless's chain? So this must be a narrative, a scene. It does not have to be a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end. It's just a scene. The speaker could be yourself, but it doesn't have to be. Scene may be humorous, may be serious, may resolve a conflict or even establish a new one. You have free reign, but you must illustrate a clear grasp of the text. You must prove to me you've done the summer reading in this case, and that you grasp the texts and the characters. You cannot change the original persona of the character. So I say the best works will offer a unique prose style and voice. Again, take risks in your writing. So this is the way I'm looking at this. Analytical writing. It's much more interesting for me as someone reading all these, and I think the kids really enjoy it. There are a lot of benefits for doing this. This is the other option they have, using Bree from On the Come Up and Mary Ann Bell from the things they carry. 750 narrative, which 2 women, they must speak of the role men play in their respective lives, but you can set it anywhere. Student in the fall term wrote a great one. Mary Ann is now a barista at Starbucks and Bree has walked in to get a latte. And they end up having this conversation. But again, this is analytical writing. You can't emulate if you don't understand. Let me give you a quick, when I did this as well, this is from my AP compositional, no, this is from Crime Lit. We read The Stranger. We read a GQ article about the North Pond Hermit in Maine, and we read Always Outgunned, Always Outnumbered. Existential texts, all of them. Your scene must include narration, must include a clear sense of place and dialogue. Your primary goal is to clearly explain how each character feels about fate and free will, but you can't use the words destiny or free will in the narrative. You can use specific words or even whole lines or passages that appear in the text, but you've only got 750 words. So by using the narrative, I mean, frankly, I know if you're remote, you can't buy this essay. You can't find this essay online. I think the kids really enjoy writing fiction. Frankly, I don't think we give our kids enough opportunity to write creatively. This is a way to do that. And I think we're really stressing analysis skills here. So I did this with Americana. It was our senior summer read a couple years ago, and many of the kids just did not like the ending of the book. So I said, that's fine, you can write your own. It's got to be a plausible ending. So we did that. These are the benefits I see of allowing kids to write narratives. They've got to grasp the nuances of the text and all the literary devices and elements that we're going to talk about around the table with them. It's a different view of the story. I think it's really good for them to take a writerly view of the story, not a critical view all the time at the story and how a story is structured. It's been really interesting to me to have discussions of paragraphs. When do I break the paragraph in dialogue? How does that work? How do I punctuate dialogue? These are things that typically students haven't really spent a lot of time in a typical literature class talking about. And they're just, the more we have those discussions with them, I really feel like they're understanding how stories are put together a lot better. I think it stresses higher level thinking. You've got to be a problem solver. Kid walked in yesterday and said, I did the math. Birdall was in his late 70s when Tim O'Brien wrote the book. The book was written, and he's going through the math. That means Birdall would be 134 years old. What do I do? And I said, you've got to solve that problem in your scene. Maybe he's dead and his grandson runs the hunting camp now. But again, it's forcing them to deal with plot and problems within plots. Again, the writerly view while they're analyzing. For me, the most important thing about this is you have to synthesize the material. I tell the kids all along, this is the most important skill I can give you. I don't know what you're going to be doing in 10 years, but I know you're going to have to take in information, put it together with something you believe in and your own thoughts, and then create some form of output. What that looks like, I don't think any of us knows right now, but being able to do that, I think, is really important, and this sort of heightens that. Like I said, they can use lines, they've got to cite them. It maintains the integrity of the assessment for me. And I find it really enjoyable to see what they come up with. Oedipus was in a hockey locker room before practice one day with one student. I mean, these are memorable writings. So if no one has questions about that, I'm happy to stop now, but I can jump to the audio comments if you'd like, Jay.
So well, that's great, John. We actually just have about 10 minutes left in our session. So I don't want to push you through to conclusion, but we're getting to the end.
All right, let me jump, because this is the next thing.
There's one question here, John.
Sure.
And I don't know, this may be beyond your area of expertise. It says, what you are saying is beautiful. How can we adapt to a lower level, especially elementary? For example, we introduced paragraph writing in grade 5, and they were finding it vague and not getting the idea. Writing is becoming very abstract. We never faced this problem when we were teaching face-to-face. So the question is, obviously your kids are very bright, very able. If we were looking at Bloom's taxonomy, they'd be way up at the peak understanding. And is there a way to do what you're talking about, do you think, with
Oh, yeah.
with lower level kids, younger kids?
Yeah, I think all levels, and I definitely think younger. I think this is important to try it. And, you know, I would use the cover letter just like you would use a rubric. You're going to put your own spin on it based on what you're seeing with your students writing. But I think giving them the opportunity to reflect on what they've attempted to do and giving them the opportunity to reflect on these are the problems that I had while I was trying to do this. And just to, again, to be able to look at and talk about their own growth. I think you can do that with younger kids, maybe not all 7 of those questions, but you could do 3. I know we're doing this with kids for whom English is not their native language. We're doing it with them. So I'm a firm believer that you can definitely do this. Again, the language of your cover letter assignment may be different than this, but I think adapting this to your kids is probably helpful.
Yeah, that's great, John. Thanks so much. So we're now down to 8 minutes. So
let me just hit this though. I think too, one of the things I've had a lot of success with is providing feedback. And this goes to the whole philosophy of everything I've talked about today. We're building the rapport over voice comments. So attaching a voice comment to a paper, I find it goes beyond the written comment. When I ask kids, would you rather have me write a long comment or give the voice comment? To a person, they say, I want the voice comment. I can hear your inflection. They don't use that word, but they can hear me when I'm confused or when I'm happy for them. So I'm a huge proponent of this. They don't see us right now, but they can hear our voices. I mentioned this to my wife. I said, yeah, you know, I asked the kids, would you rather have a long written feedback or would you rather have my voice? And she said, they want your voice because you sound like Fozzie Bear. I don't think that that's true. I think they hear the intonation, they hear the tone, they hear, you know, just how proud I am of them. They hear my confusions. And I do think, again, it runs counter, hearing your voice runs counter to that transactionary relationship. This is a quick comment. Now, let me say this. This always accompanies marginal comments. So again, we're using a Google Doc and I'm commenting on the paper in written form in the margin. This is my final comment. So this is the end.
You did a lot of things well.
Might have to turn up the volume.
You integrated the text well. I do think there's a counter argument here that you might want to consider. I think it would strengthen the whole paper, is to talk a little bit about the other side. I mean, the other side is going to say, yes, ex-convicts should be considered differently when they apply for a job and all of that. Or even, are there crimes that we are willing to look differently at? I think there's a larger aspect of this discussion that you didn't really get into, and that is the fact it is murder and rape. It's not OUI or theft or something. So I feel like you left some on the table there that still needs to be discussed. I thought the writing in this was strong. I thought the way you integrated the quotes was effective. I don't know about ending with the thesis here. I wandered around the first paragraph a couple or 3 times looking for the thesis. So maybe something to let us know that it's coming. Maybe you end the first paragraph with a question that we know we're going to read to get answered.
So that is, that's what this would look like, or what this does look like. again, this is on the heels of marginalia, the comments I put in the margin using Google.
So John, does the Google Doc record the voice? We had a question about the platform that you use to record voice notes.
I use the Read and Write. This is a free app if you're a teacher. You use your educational email to sign up, and I'm a huge fan of that. It gives you 1 or 2 minute comments, as many as you want. So where I'm typing comments in the margin, if there's a paragraph with significant issues, I can just speak it using Read and Write. You just put the cursor and you just stop talking. The Kami app is great too. It's more, there's more to it. There's a lot more you can do. But yeah, for me, using Google, having this add-on, the Read and Write, I find it super. But you know, for me, a 3-minute voice recording might take me 15 minutes to type, just to think it all the way through. And I don't get the intonation. So I find it super easy. The kids, because they write in Google, they have that. So I'm using this as the faculty advisor to our student newspapers and all that on those type of assignments too. So yeah, Read and Write and Kami are the two.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, John. We're down to about 3 minutes, so we need to bring this to a conclusion. Sorry to say, we could go on for a lot longer.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm going to jump through some other things, and this is my email.
That would be great.
Yeah, this is my email. If anybody would like to email me, and just to continue the discussion, or I can share some of the slides we didn't get to. I had a slide on rubrics. But anyway, I just want to say thanks very much to everybody for starting your morning with me here today. It's early, and most of us are running off to class.
Thank you, John. This was a great session. Thank you so much. And people are writing very positive comments on the session about how helpful they found it to be.
Right.
So just a couple of words. So thank you, John. That was great.
Thank you.
We really could go on for a lot longer. All of us who are interested in teaching writing and how we help kids find their own voice, how they become authentic. I think what you said about establishing that relationship between you as the editor and the kids as the author is so positive for people, and it's just such a fundamental shift, I think, in people's thinking. It's really helpful. Thank you so much.